Right then. Well, I think that was well worth the wait. We've managed to get another few people in, which is always nice. So, for those of you who've not come to one of these before, which would be more typical than coming every week, I think it's only me who comes every week. We're going to be talking today about the work we do at UniAdmissions here, the kind of research, the kind of expertise we have, and to give you as much insight as we can over the course of about half an hour to 45 minutes. Talking through today, we're talking about reapplying, and then we'll go on to a bit of a Q&A. Then we'll all sort of make an escape sometime between 3:15 and 3:30. So I'm sorry if you're going to be missing the beginning of any football matches or anything like that. My name is Matt. I'm the head of research here at UniAdmissions. So my job is to make sure that all of the suggestions and strategies and tips that we put out there, and all of our resources and publications and tuition, to make sure all of those things are based in fact, that we can back them up with graphs and Excel sheets and things like that, and so as to make sure that all the things we do are things that actually work. I'm joined today by my colleague James. James, I know who you are, but other people may not.
Hi everybody. Yeah, so I'm James. I guess I spend my time sort of talking
quiet,
with students. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Matt?
Yes, that was actually me. That's because I'd muted my own computer. I'm sure that was fine for everyone else.
Oh, it was going so well. I shall start again. Well, yes, I'm James, and I spend my time talking with parents and students about how best to prepare for these types of competitive applications. So I'll be sort of helping Matt today. It's nice to be back after sort of Christmas doing these open days again. Yeah,
it's nice to see you after such a long break. I just didn't know what to do with myself of a Saturday afternoon. No one watching me, no recordings of me being made. It was very disconcerting. So that's myself and James. There's a lovely picture of us that I could have swapped to earlier. But as I mentioned, we're going to be talking this week about reapplying to Oxford and Cambridge. So students who've recently had the news they were hoping not to receive, but are feeling motivated to give it another go. And we're going to talk about how well that works, what things you can do to improve your chances, and so on. And we're going to be joined later on, I believe, by one of the students we've worked with in this cycle who has been fortunate enough to get a place. He'll be able to give you a bit more first-hand information, because as you can probably guess from the state of my hair, I'm not 18 years old and haven't been for quite some time. So it's always helpful to have someone who has been through the process more recently than 2008 when I did it. George Bush was president. It was that long ago. So without further ado, we'll be talking about, as I said, why you might want to reapply. I'm sure many of you will already have your reasons, whether or not reapplying is a bit weird, and also whether it works or not, because of course, if it isn't going to have the desired impact the second time round, you may not want to go through that disappointment again. So why might you want to reapply? So for the vast majority of students, they decide that they want to reapply the moment they don't get that offer. The disappointingly small envelope comes through the front door, or do they email you these days? I don't know. That sinking feeling in the stomach, the sense of rejection, that quickly turns into a redoubled determination to do it again. Now, the thing to bear in mind here is the day that you get that bad news, you're setting yourself up for a whole another year if you want to go and do it again. So it's a big commitment of time, and there's no guarantee you're going to get a different answer the second time round. Plenty of just as many people, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're doing 2 whole cycles, you're still not getting in. It might be really dispiriting. So I think the first thing to do is to think about what your motivation for reapplying is. Is it just some sort of sense of revenge towards the university that has done you wrong? Is it to do with the prestige and the glamour of going to Oxbridge? Or is it more about the specific course that you had your heart set on, something that you're not going to be able to do anywhere else? Is it about being with your boyfriend or girlfriend who's got in? That was, I don't know if that's still as commonplace as it was when I was younger. You know, figure out why it is you want to reapply and why it is that you're not interested in taking up any of the other offers you might already have. So it might be that you can go to Imperial or UCL instead, and those are both perfectly good universities. Why do you want to reapply and not go and spend time there? And then you want to think about what you're going to do differently. Of course, something, you know, it didn't work the first time, so you're going to have to change your approach. So what are some things that you can do differently? I would suggest, first of all, make sure, if you haven't done it already, write down the questions you were asked at the interview if you can remember them, and make sure you get feedback from the university as well, so that you can see where the areas that you need to improve are. You know, was it the admissions test score? Was it the interview? Was it your personal presentation? Was the UCAS reference perhaps not as good as it might have been? You can ask your school for the reference they gave you, and take a look at that, see what can be polished on there. And you can download a copy of your UCAS application as a big PDF. I recommend doing this just because you're going to find it annoying filling the form out the second time. And so it's good to remember what you wrote down the first time and have all the answers there, so you can sort of copy paste across when you're filling it out again. That brings us to, we're doing a sort of a double pie chart round. So in the past, we've talked about a pie chart that looks a little bit like this when we're thinking about applications. So the most important parts of your application are the admissions test and the exam. The admissions test, because you have to do well on it to get to the interview, not the exam, sorry. And that A-level and GCSE grades are less important than your performance in that test, and that the personal statement and the reference, they're nice, but you can still overcome you know, dodgy GCSEs and a sort of a mediocre personal statement if you absolutely nail that test. Now, this is the model we've been using for the last couple of years. However, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, who I will not name, who works in the admissions process at Oxford, and this is what they said to me. Now, I know many of you will have done the teacher assessed GCSEs, and so I apologize for this like crudeness of calling them, suggesting they're not real GCSEs. But yeah, the conversation we had, and it went on a little further than this, was that the role of GCSEs is becoming smaller and smaller, because the students who are being compared, they haven't done the same exam. They may well not even have been looking at the same material. They can have been assessed by a teacher. The comparisons you can make using GCSEs are just really not very good anymore, because they just aren't sort of under exam conditions anymore. So we've sort of tweaked our pie chart a bit. We've ramped up a little bit the shape of the admissions test scores. We've shrunk the GCSEs a little bit down, and the interviews are up a little bit as well. James, would you like to talk about the pie chart a little bit as well? Because I don't want to, having clarified the changes, if you can tell us what it's supposed to mean.
Sure. Yeah, so I think actually, firstly, because I do speak to a lot of students who unfortunately haven't received the offers that they wanted. And obviously it's, you know, really, really disappointing. But I would say, whether this actually helps anybody, I don't know. But, you know, if you didn't get an offer, you're actually in the majority. So it's not really a reflection of you. It doesn't mean that you're a bad applicant necessarily. It's just a reflection of how competitive these applications are. And so, yeah, I think that's worth sort of pointing out. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to reapply, or if you're listening to this and you're applying for the first time, I think what a lot of people don't really understand is, how are you actually assessed in this process? How do Oxford and Cambridge actually decide, which students to give offers to and which students not to give offers to. And so that's really what this pie chart is demonstrating. I think we've got a slight sort of mismatch with a couple of the sections there. But essentially the idea here is that the two biggest parts of your application are your interview and your admissions test by far. They are the most significant parts of the application. So they're in grey and orange. I think blue is actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, that's supposed to be everything else. Is that right?
Maybe I have mislabeled them, but yeah, certainly the GCSEs and the personal statement, all of that is a smaller portion than it once was.
Yeah. So grades are important, absolutely. You do have to do well academically, but logically, when they're going about their decision making, you can't be first in your A levels. You can be first in your admissions test. So it's a much easier way for the universities to sort of rank, order, and compare students against each other. So, whilst, yes, you have to do well academically, it's really important to understand how important the test and the interview are. Matt loves his data. I don't know if we've got any statistics later on today, but what we see, fantastic. There's a really, really clear correlation always between your admissions test score, your chances of getting an interview, and then beyond that, an offer. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit more. But yes, basically, this is how you're assessed. So if you're going to reapply, really, this is how you should allocate your time to prepare, based on actually what's most important.
Fab. Thanks, James. As James mentioned there, we'll be whipping out some statistics later on to try and give you a sense of the texture of the whole situation. I always like to work with real numbers when we're talking about this sort of thing, because it's very easy to go off and make all kinds of unfounded claims when it comes to Oxbridge. And so I always like to try and ground us in facts as much as possible, because I think it helps you to trust us, and it makes sure that whatever we're doing actually works. So as we said, what you want to be doing if you're thinking of reapplying is to try and figure out what it was that didn't work first time round. Was it the admissions test, the interview, the reference, the personal statement? Try and figure out where you want to improve. But what you really want to be thinking about is the reason that you most likely will have not got in if all of those are good is going to be that there was someone else who came across as more passionate, more engaged, more committed. And so you want to take that time to really understand what your motivation is in a real kind of depth of detail. Why is it that you want to study the subject to go to the university? Why is it that you're thinking of taking an extra year to go through this process again? Really figure out what it is that's driving you so that you can put that at the center of everything you're going to do moving forward, because it's a big commitment, and so you want to have something that you're going to be able to really hold on to. Now, there are a few other considerations. These are a little bit more tactical, which is the stuff I enjoy a little bit more. So the first question is, are you going to apply for the same subject again? If you didn't get in for PPE or E&M, are you going to apply for PPE or E&M again? Now, often, for obvious reasons, the subjects that students are most keen to reapply for are the ones that are hardest to get into in the first place. So do you want to look at what alternative subjects there might be? If you've been going for E&M at Oxford, have you considered going for economics at Cambridge? If you went for PPE at Oxford, have you looked at HSPS at Cambridge? If you were going for maths at Cambridge, have you looked at what options there are over at Oxford? If you were going for NatSci, for example, at Cambridge, do you feel like having to do more of a mix of them didn't help you? Do you want to go and do straight physics at Oxford? These are the things you want to be thinking about. And if you are sticking with the same university, do you really have your heart set on that one college? Look at the other colleges. Perhaps if you've gone for a Balliol or a Magdalen or a Trinity, think about going for one of the colleges that's slightly less popular. It won't make a huge difference to your application, but it's worth making sure that it's different people putting their eyes on your new applications, they're seeing you afresh. And you want to be thinking, if you are changing things, and I would generally recommend, tweaking a little bit, what do you need to do differently in each of the parts of the application to make that work for you? Do you need to improve your maths if you're going for physics now? Do you need to spend longer looking at the at your essay style? Do you have some exam technique to work on? Figure out what it is that you can do to improve alongside the changes you're thinking of making. Now, the next thing is a little more personal. Is reapplying weird? I bring this up because for a lot of people, the thought of not getting in and then doing it again feels a little bit naughty. Like you've had your one chance and you shouldn't get to do it again. Or that it's just strange hanging around doing the same thing again, perhaps delaying going to university by a year. And so I just wanted to sort of reassure everyone on this. In 2020, which is the last year that I have the complete data for, because I'm in the midst of an Information Commissioner appeal to get some more information out of Cambridge at the moment, which is fun. In 2020, 930 people applied to Oxford for the second time and 622 for Cambridge. So that's just over 1,500 people who applied for Oxbridge for the second time. There's a very small number of people who apply a third time. I think in this data set, there was someone who had applied 5 years in a row. Surprisingly, they still weren't getting in. But the thing to look at here is that at least 7% of people applying are reapplying. And that's Oxford and then Oxford again, not Oxford and then Cambridge, or Cambridge and then Oxford. That's just Oxford this year and Oxford next year. So that's 7%, that's what, 1 in 12 people. So not that unusual from a statistical standpoint, about as unusual as being left-handed. But it's more than that, because most people, if they're reapplying, will tend to swap. If they've applied to Oxford and not got in, they will tend to apply for Cambridge the next year. This is anecdotal because it is impossible from a GDPR standpoint to actually put these data sets together, because that would mean tracking individual people, which is against the law. But my guess would be that at least as many people apply for the other one the second time round as doing for the first one. The first one the second time. Ugh, it's getting confusing. So I would say that between 10 and 15%, perhaps even as high as 20% of people applying to Oxbridge each year have already applied the previous year or years previously. To put that in context, that's more people reapplying to Cambridge. That's people who are going for Cambridge for the second time in a row, and people who did Oxford last year and are coming back and going for Cambridge this time. There are more of those people than there are people applying for classics and linguistics and music put together. It's nearly as many people as there are applying for law. It's a spectacular number. Between, I would say, 10 and 20% of people are probably on their second go round. Now, when you meet them in the green room or in the JCR or wherever you are on the application weekend, it's unlikely they're going to tell you that, unless they look, 26, and you realize that they have applied 9 years in a row. It's unlikely you'll find out, but rest assured that there are a lot of people doing it. They're just probably keeping it quiet. So the next question then is, given that it is not weird, and if you've really figured out that it is really the thing you want to do, you really, really don't want to go to UCL, which is good because I went to King's and UCL is bad. You've decided that you're definitely going to go for it. So the question then is, does reapplying work? So what we're going to do is we're going to run through a bunch of fairly popular subjects. These are the subjects that attract the most reappliers, and look at what a difference it makes. So looking at computer science at Cambridge, the success rate is around 12% for students applying the first time round, but those who apply again they get in at a slightly higher rate, rising from 12 to about 16%. Now, that's a pretty big jump. That's a jump of nearly a third. So that's something that you can be really positive about. Of course, computer science at Cambridge, still 88% of people aren't getting in. So pushing that 88 down to an 84, that's nice, but they're still long odds. So I would say if you are thinking about reapplying for a really competitive subject like this, I would say it is on the whole much more important to think about whether you're going to swap university or swap course, because you're looking at some fairly small probabilities. We look at experimental psychology over at Oxford. We see a huge jump here, nearly double the rate of success for people who are applying for the second time, up to very nearly 31% compared to 17%. You'll probably notice that we are cursed by sample size in all of these, because the number of people doing this, while it is a substantial chunk of all applicants, it isn't, unfortunately, a large enough number for us not to have difficulties with sample size. So watch out for that as we go. PPE at Oxford, which is the most popular, one of the most popular reapplication subjects. Your success rate now more than doubles. You're 1 in 3 if you're going for it the second time round. That is a huge difference. Coming in from 84%, 86% of people not getting in to only 2 in 3 not getting in. That's a huge difference. And so if it's PPE, oh no, this is philosophy and linguistics. Oh God, if only I'd learned to read. If only I had learned to read while I was at university. Yeah, you can see a huge change there. I did think that wasn't very many people going for PPE, all things considered. Moving on to history, a word I don't think I can get confused about. You can see here that the number of reapplicants is really large. We're looking at what is that, yeah, a really substantial number, 270 odd reapplying and getting in 10% more often than those who are going for it the first time. My impression, looking at this data, is that reapplication works better for the more essay-based subjects and economics, and less well for the mathematics subjects. We can sort of speculate later as to why that might be if you'd like, but I think that's something to take into account as well. Looking at history at Cambridge again, we've got a healthy number of reapplications, but history at Cambridge, it's not working. People who are applying for the second time are actually less likely to get in than those who are applying for the first time. So I think the lesson there is, if you didn't get into Oxford or Cambridge for history, don't worry about reapplying if you're reapplying to Oxford, but don't reapply to Cambridge because the odds seem to be worse. Looking at history and politics, we see, and I think this is back in line with that consistent pattern. Students who are applying for the second time, they're getting in between 30 and 50% more often than those who are going for it the first time. Whether that's because they've had more practice, more time to prepare. Maybe it's just because they've already got the A-levels in the bag, and so they have that pressure off them. You can see there's that pattern repeating itself. I haven't got too many more of these, James, don't worry. Looking at law, we see again a really substantial number of reapplications and a jump in terms of the success rate, again rising by about a third. Law at Cambridge, we see a small decline, but still not a massive difference there. Not quite as large as we saw with history. I think we're now getting to the ones everyone likes, the most popular ones. Looking at HSPS at Cambridge, we can see that closing in on 7 or 8% of people who are applying are reapplicants. That's because we're double counting here. And you can see that the success rate is roughly the same. At this sample size, I would never suggest taking seriously a 0.7. The p-value on this research isn't amazing, so that's definitely not a difference. That's probably flat. Economics at Cambridge, another one that's popular to reapply for. We can see a small jump in terms of the success rate when people are applying for the second time. And of course, in those 5,500 people, we've no idea how many of them are people who have failed to get into PPE at Oxford the previous year before swapping over to Cambridge, which is our final one of these examples. And we see the absolutely colossal number of people that go for PPE, nearly 10,000 people a year. And that 570 of those, so well over 5%, something around that 7% we talked about earlier, are reapplicants going for Oxford for the second time in a row. And some of those will also be people coming across, there'll also be people coming across from Cambridge. So I would wager that something in the order of 10 to 12% of people applying for PPE are going for it the second time around. And the really sad thing here, of course, is that even with the number of space available for PPE, they can't all become MPs. There just isn't enough room in Parliament for them. It's very disappointing, but it is good they're all trying. So to sort of summarize a tiny bit, the first thing to do if you're thinking about reapplying is to look at all of the feedback you've got and use that to guide your approach to reapplying. Really figure out why it is that you want to do it, what you need to change, and whether you want to commit that whole year to avoiding going to LSE. Again, I think it's a good idea to avoid going to LSE because of petty rivalries, but it's something you want to spend some time seriously thinking about. You want to make sure that you've reflected on your experiences, what you liked, what you didn't like, what's motivating you to get it to go again. Make sure that you've got a really good reason. You want to make sure that you do get the A-level grades. There's no point in reapplying if you've got an A and two Bs, because you're not going to get in anyway. So make sure you do get all those A stars or A double stars if they've invented those yet. Have they invented those yet, James? Apparently not. And make sure that when you're sort of preparing yourself for the admissions tests and for the interview as well, that you're setting yourself up with skills that are going to be useful outside of the Oxbridge interview context. Young people don't have to do job interviews for the most part, so it's a skill you may not have spent as much time developing as someone older would have done, and it's worth really working on because it will serve you very well for the rest of your life. And the last thing to say is if you are taking a full gap year, don't waste it. Find something good and worthwhile to do. If you're in a STEM subject, make sure you keep your maths up to scratch because it's really easy to let that to let your maths decline. It's one of the reasons they don't normally recommend a gap year for STEM students. If you're working in an essay subject in the humanities, take an opportunity to really deepen your interest in a particular area, to really develop some specialization. Pick an author. Don't just read Pride and Prejudice. Read all of the books about read all of Jane Austen's books, then read some criticism. Really develop an area of expertise that you can talk about and make an important part of your application. Did you have anything to add, James, before we talk a little bit about the ways in which uni admissions can help in a sort of a more thorough way than this 22-minute long PowerPoint presentation?
No, I mean, those statistics speak for themselves, don't they, really? I think a lot of people are kind of put off by reapplying because they just somehow think that they're going to have less chance, and that they've sort of, like you say, they've had their one chance and it didn't work. But actually, if you're really interested in this subject, you really want to study it at Oxford or Cambridge, then I would encourage you to reapply. You've got to obviously work hard and try and be the best applicant that you can be, but it can work for you. And in some cases, you've got a much better chance, actually. You've been through the process already. And so you kind of know where you need to improve. So yeah, that's all I'd say at this stage, Matt.
Fab. So I'm going to hand over to you, James, for a little bit to talk about the services we can provide. If you sort of shout when you want me to next slide, but otherwise I'm gonna let you take care of it while I go and rest my voice with a nice glass of water because I can feel it starting to crack.
Lovely. All right. So, I mean, if you hadn't already guessed, we are a preparation school at UniAdmissions. So essentially what we do is support students applying for these competitive courses at Oxford and Cambridge, and also medicine, as well. I think the idea of this is to provide students with structure. That pie chart, for me, that's quite exciting, which is kind of a strange thing to say, to be excited by a pie chart, because what that pie chart shows is that your grades, whilst important, are such a small part of the process. From this point onwards now, you have a huge opportunity to influence your own chances of being successful in this process if you work hard and you work smartly. And essentially what we have are programs of support. Typically a program has sort of 4 parts to it, and I'm just going to very sort of quickly take you through those to give you some sense of this. And perhaps it's something you're interested in, perhaps not, that's okay. So the first part of a program, Matt, next slide, please. So one of the parts are the resources. So, we know that the admissions tests are really important. So what we want to do here is to provide you with a really structured curriculum of resources to engage with. So that's kind of question banks, mock tests with word solutions, all of that sort of stuff. We've published, Matt, you might have to correct me, over 80 sort of, some best-selling sort of textbooks for these applications. So as part of a program, there's a sort of structured curriculum that you work through preparing for the test, for the personal statement, and for your interview. Next, please. Okay, so I think this slide is just sort of showing the portal. So when a student joins a program, we have a preparation portal which essentially holds all of these things together. It's the hub of a program. So it's where all of the reading lists are. It's where the academies for the tests and the personal statement and interviews are. Students submit work through the portal to be getting feedback. And this sort of holds everything together, essentially. Next slide, please, Matt. Okay, so actually a big part of a program are the enrichment seminars. So every week, you would be joining other students who are applying to the same subject as you. And we hold these seminars on a Sunday with our applicants and then our tutors. And we look at key topics within the subject each week. So for example, if you're applying for economics, we might be looking at behavioral economics. One week, we might be looking at international relations another week. So this is all about broadening your understanding of these topics and also building towards an interview as well. Because, as you guys know, those of you who are reapplicants, a big part of these interviews are being able to discuss at length these different topics within your subject. And so we want to sort of build up that skill throughout a program. Next slide, please, Matt. Another part of the program are intensive courses. So these happen a little bit before the sort of deadlines of the application. And they're small group courses, and you work on consolidating everything that you've been sort of working on over the year. And they're sort of a final springboard into the test or the interview. So they work really, really well. And then finally, Matt, one-to-one tuition. So I think, it's important that you're working with somebody who's actually been through the same process as you. So what we do on our programs is we match you with a tutor who has studied that same subject as you. So for example, if you're hoping to, you are applying to land economy at Cambridge, then you'd work with a tutor who themselves studied land economy at Cambridge. So somebody who's been through the same process themselves successfully, and can work with you to help really sort of nail down the areas that you need to improve and help you to do that. So I believe that might be the end of the slides for programs, unless I'm wrong, Matt.
No, I think probably everyone's had enough slides. There were a couple more I wanted to throw in to sort of reassure people. The first was just to flag up again our success rate. We're really proud of how well things have been going for us, particularly in a really competitive year this last year. We'll of course be updating these numbers in the nearer future once we've got everyone's outcomes back, and we're hopeful of maintaining at the same level that we've been able to achieve. We're we're really proud of that number. The other things to say are, please do say something nice about me on Trustpilot. No one has yet, despite being prompted every week, written a lovely review of me. Please do. All the reviews are of Rohan. Ugh, I'm much better. And I think that takes us through it. So on to the Q&A, where we're going to be joined by the lovely Thomas, hopefully. I will see if I can promote him to being a panelist. I hope that will have sent him a little prompt somewhere so that I can put him in charge for a bit. And yeah, you should have a little animation playing in front of you, clarifying how to become how to book a consultation with us. So if you liked what you've heard so far, then you can speak to James about it. He and the rest of his team will talk you through what your options are, how we can support you, and you can book that completely free consultation just by visiting the website and doing as the animation suggests. And here we are, we've got a Thomas. Excellent. Right then, so please throw your questions into the Q&A basket, and we'll sort of compare things from there. But I think mostly we're gonna let Thomas talk today because he's more interesting than I am. So first off, James Hughes writes, my feedback was very positive. My interview was strong and test score was above average. He was applying for E&M. Is it worth reapplying? Tom, what do you make of it?
Well, I mean, I think it entirely depends on intuitively and emotionally what feels right. I thought for me reapplying was a good decision because it didn't really feel right for me to go anywhere else. I really wanted to go to Cambridge, but I think it also depends on whether you're ready to be rejected again, because I think you have to kind of be at peace with that being a possibility. But yeah, so it depends on those two things. In my case, I think it was the best decision I've ever made in my life, probably, to reapply. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But yeah, it really depends on how badly you want it.
Fantastic. I should just say, actually, maybe we should give a little bit of context here. So Thomas, who's very kindly joined us, actually worked with us, didn't you, Thomas, on one of our programs? So I think we spoke together, was it sort of early last year, wasn't it? And we had a chat and you know, had a chat with Mum as well. And then Thomas sort of worked with us on a program and got some good news recently. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us kind of the course you applied for and what happened.
So I applied to study economics at Jesus College, Cambridge. And yeah, just a few days ago, I got an unconditional offer to study there next year. Fantastic. So yeah.
How are you feeling?
Oh, great. I think the best feeling yeah, of my life so far.
Wow, fantastic. Lovely. Okay, so yes, that is who Thomas is. That's the context. Okay, cool. Matt, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not a problem at all. So who else have we got? Sharon asks, do you have to take a year out? Can you apply while you're studying at another university? So this is an interesting one because, well, a lot of people, it's very unusual to not get into Oxford or Cambridge and also not get into anywhere else. So the chances are that you're going to have other options, you know, a UCL, an Imperial, a Warwick, an Edinburgh, something like that. And of course, you can start there and apply to Oxford while you're studying. There are a few small downsides to that. You have to make sure you keep in touch with your school because probably the university won't be particularly happy about giving you a reference if you're about to escape. And you'll have to balance that application with studying for that course at your new university. And of course, if you do get the offer in, what is it, the middle of January, decide whether you're going to stick around for the rest of that first year of that course or not bother. And the danger there is, you might have made friends, you may be having a nice time. It's a little bit of a dangerous one there, because you may find out that actually you're perfectly happy at the university you've chosen as a kind of stopgap, and change your mind entirely about reapplying. So it's really, it's really up to you. I would say that going to university in general is great fun. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with going to another university in the meantime, but bear in mind that it's going to end up probably costing you more, because you're going to have to pay for that extra year. But also that you'll get, there are all sorts of risks associated with where it turns out you really like it or not, which might make the whole process a little bit more emotionally difficult. Did you consider going somewhere else, Thomas?
Well, on my gap year, I'm actually I'm studying econometrics at a university in the Netherlands. So that's actually the path I took as a reapplicant. But I would say it's definitely a more difficult path to take, because you're kind of balancing starting at university with like this hard admissions process yet again. But I also think if financially it's possible, it's a good thing to write about in your personal statement. Yeah,
that sounds good. And how have you been finding that? We've had a question from Jacob, who asks, how can you make the most of the gap year? And the Netherlands fun?
Yeah, it's good fun. I mean, it as you said, makes the decision harder in the end. Well, it makes it harder to leave after only 1 year. But I definitely think it's a good way to keep learning in a gap year. And it doesn't really feel like you're losing a year. It really feels like you're learning quite a lot. Especially if it's something you haven't done before. For example, econometrics, I'd never studied before. So I think it's a good idea, but I'm also speaking from the perspective of an international student, where the funds are, not the funds, but the tuition is much cheaper than for UK students. So that's also a consideration.
Yeah, and of course, if you're leaving your town and your friends and everyone else is going off to uni and you're just hanging around, that might not be much fun either. You might feel as though you're missing out the chance to escape from Basingstoke and go to Bristol. We have a few other questions. Benish asks about applying for a PhD at Oxford or Cambridge afterwards, after completing an undergrad degree. So that's very much an option. We don't work with as many students who are applying for masters and PhDs as we do for undergrads, I believe, James. But we've had a few success stories in the past, right?
Yeah, it depends on the application process, really. I mean, the whole point of what we're doing is trying to help, give you the chance to maximize your chances of getting an offer. If you're doing a master's, typically you're not going to be doing an admissions test. You may have an interview. So actually a lot of the decision-making process is going to be based on your past, academics, which of course we can't really influence. But if you do need some support because you do have an interview, yeah, absolutely. Give us a call. We'll have a chat and see if we can help. Matt, actually, somebody has asked a little bit about medicine reapplications. I don't know if we had any statistics. My understanding is that on the whole, reapplicants have a slightly higher chance of being accepted. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that medicine's an interesting one, because you've got to be, the thing to remember with medicine is, regardless of where you go to university, you will be a doctor when you've finished. They don't teach you some kind of different special extra medicine at Cambridge. You don't get to find out about the secret extra lung. They don't tell you how to cure cancer. It is the same medical education you're going to come out with wherever you go. So you will still be a real doctor, even if you go to Manchester or another university that isn't quite as prestigious as Oxford or Cambridge. And so I would say, if you are applying for medicine, if you have got an offer from another university, but not from Oxford or Cambridge, I would generally advise against reapplying. If you're determined to study medicine and you've had 4 rejections, then reapplying, particularly if you're going to go and study biochemistry or something like that in the meantime with your 5th choice, that's a good idea. But I would really warn against setting your sights on, I want to be a doctor and only a doctor who was trained at Oxford. Just being a doctor is already a pretty impressive achievement. You, good as Oxford or Cambridge are, I would still say being a doctor is more important than having gone there. So don't turn down an offer from King's and Guy's or UCL or Imperial just so that you can have another go at becoming an Oxford doctor, because it's hard enough to get into medical school, it is, basically, without being picky.
I think also when you reapply, you've already been through the process once already. So perhaps, you know, you're actually in a slightly better position anyway. Would you agree, Thomas? I mean, doing it a second time, did you feel just generally a little bit more comfortable with the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main advantage is just confidence, in the sense that you kind of know what's expected of you in the process, and you know what you have to do in order to get there. And I think that gives you a confidence boost throughout the process, which definitely helps you a lot. But I mean, being a year older also helps in that regard.
Fantastic. And I suppose as we're on the open day, we should talk a little bit about your experience on the program working with us, Thomas. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how it helped you. You know, did it help you? Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
If it didn't, don't say.
So I'd say the 2 main things that helped me were the one-to-one tutoring and then the intensive courses. The one-to-one, I mean, kind of what I said before. What they help most with is kind of, how do I say this? It kind of clarifies what's expected of you in the admissions process, and the sense of like, it's a lot scarier to swim in the ocean at night than in broad daylight, right? And I feel like the tutoring gives you confidence in knowing what you need to do and how you behave at an interview, well, especially for interview, how you answer questions, and it also helps you, I think, develop your thinking. And a third thing, I know I'm waffling a bit, but having an external pressure to get you to do the preparatory work is good, because, I mean, obviously you would think because you're motivated to go to this university, you're going to put in as much work as possible on your own. But the fact of the matter is, having an external force coming in and telling you have to do this preparation really pushes you harder than you would have pushed yourself. So yeah, I think that's what helps me most, knowing what I had to do and just following instructions, essentially.
I think you know, a lot of the feedback that I get from students who kind of work with us on these programs is that actually one of the most helpful things is just having some structure. Whether you agree, Thomas, I think it's very hard, you know, no matter how dedicated you are or academic, it's very hard to set yourself a plan over a year to know exactly what you need to be doing, what resources you're going to use, you know, what you're going to do this day and that day, and to be able to get feedback on how you're progressing. So I think having a structure takes away a little bit of the pressure, perhaps. You know, you can just sort of get on and do what you need to do. Do you agree, Thomas?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's not as much stress about figuring things out for yourself. I like having a plan, essentially. You're told what to do and you do it. I mean, you have a choice in that, obviously, but it's helpful.
Fantastic.
Lovely. A few more questions. Advice asks about the role of the admissions tests. So yeah, we find a really strong correlation between admissions test score and success. Roughly speaking, people who score in the bottom third of the admissions test score, they don't get an interview. People who score in the middle third, about half of them do, and very nearly everyone who scores in the top third of the admissions test will get an interview, and somewhere around a half to a quarter of them will get a place. And when you look at the top 10% of scores in the admissions test, almost all of those people get in. So while it's a little difficult to unpack the causation because we don't have matching data for interviews, what we can see is that the admissions test has a really strong correlation with whether or not you get in. If Thomas fancies it, I'll dig out some of the data for him, and he can play around with it in R and get us some lovely robust p-values and things like that. That might be fun. He's laughing politely. I don't think he actually wants to. We have Rajan asks, how was it balancing your first year at uni and reapplying? And on a sort of a related note, Reshma says, how did you explain to the university that you were going to leave after a year to go to Oxford? Were they upset? Was it embarrassing? Have you told them yet? I guess it's the weekend, maybe not.
I haven't told them yet, but I did have to pester them for my transcript, so they kind of knew. I mean, the thing is, the university is a large organization, so you're going to individuals to tell them that you're leaving, and those individuals don't really care about you individually or what you're going to do. So at the end of the day, I don't think they care that much. I mean, especially in the Netherlands, on my course, after first year, about 50% of people enrolled at the beginning drop out or change course, so they don't really mind. On the question of balancing first year uni and reapplying, it is, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it is difficult. Like you will be working a lot more than other people, and also you can't really tell everyone, because I mean, not the best freshers week icebreaker to tell people you're going to be hopefully leaving after a year. But I mean, it's rewarding in the end, and if it's what you really want to do, I do recommend going through with it. But it is going to be more difficult, more work, and you're not going to really be able to share your concerns over reapplying with your uni friends that much. So that makes it difficult.
Thank you. I think there was one question actually I wanted to refer to. So somebody earlier on asked, you know, they did very well in their test, they did well in their interview, they actually got good feedback, but they didn't get an offer. So should they reapply? And I think that's a good point actually, because I think sometimes people assume that they didn't get an offer because they didn't do well, but actually it's all about, you know, a degree to how well you do. You have to be one of the top applicants to get an offer. So actually you may well have done, you know, well first time rounds, but second time round you just have to do a little bit better. And that sort of brings me to another question which we often get asked, which is about when should you actually start preparing for a reapplication. And I think Matt, you've talked about this before. There is the point of diminishing returns, particularly with the test preparation. And you know, we know it's easy to go from 30 to 40%, but to go from 70 to 80% is significantly harder. And when you look at the data, and we had an open day on this, the difference between 2 or 3 marks in a test can equate to sometimes a 10, 15%, 20% higher chance of getting an offer. So actually, if you can just work a little bit harder and more smartly, if that's actually a correct expression, then you can do even better and hopefully get an offer. So yes, sorry, Matt, next question.
Yes, so just thinking about that and the admissions test scores, the thing to remember there is these tests are not especially long. Often they only take an hour. There aren't massive numbers of questions in them. So for example, in the relevant part of the BMAT, there are 32 questions. Now, if you sort of imagine a bell curve in your mind, as I'm sure all normal people do, as you're hitting the middle of that bell curve, each of those extra correct answers is shifting you above between 5 and 8% of the people who took the test, because you've got, you know, in a linear distribution, you would have 3% of you, everyone, but there would be 3% of each. You've got a bell curve. In any case, a couple of extra correct answers can take you from being just about in the top half to suddenly being in the top quarter of one of these tests. So making sure that you're getting everything out of them that you can is really important. Because like James says, getting from 70 to 80 is much harder than getting from 30 to 40, but that's also the important bit. Because getting from 30 to 40 isn't going to change your chance of getting an interview very much. It's the chances of getting, it's the difference between 70 and 80. Let's have a look at a few other questions. Reshma asks, I see. So Reshma, I would say, particularly in light of the, Prabita has told us that the Cambridge website says they don't normally consider applications from students who are already enrolled at another UK university. Now, I don't know what powers of detective work they have to check, but again, it's one of those things you might want to keep quiet and perhaps leave the other university without necessarily explaining why, as it will be a little bit awkward to go and get the reference from, and this is largely because the amount of funding the university gets is tied to the number of students there. And so you saying, actually, I'm not going to stick around, that is taking money out of their, that's taking money away from their budgets they're expecting to have to spend, particularly in smaller departments. If you're, doing classics or something, and that could be a bit of an inconvenience for the university, but, there's nothing wrong with you changing around if that's what you want. I would just be nice and subtle about it if you're doing, moving from UCL to Oxford. Advice asked about choosing between Oxford and Cambridge. Why do you hate Oxford, Thomas? Which, to be clear, is the correct opinion.
Well, I think for economics, it's actually an easier reason. It's an easier answer to give. I mean, Oxford doesn't offer pure econ. That was the main decision from an academic perspective. But also at the end of the day, I think it should just be an emotional decision. You should you just let your heart decide, essentially. For me, from the start, I knew I didn't want to go to Oxford. I don't know why. It just didn't appeal to me. So yeah, it's completely an emotional decision. I wouldn't try to think about it too much.
There you go. And it's a dreadful place, and Cambridge is much better. Would be my answer. Monica asks about starting one course at Oxford or Cambridge and then changing to another one. So people do sometimes do this. I knew a few people who did this when I was at Cambridge. The difficulty is that if you are applying for a course that you think is easier to get into so that you can switch into a course that's harder to get into, people running these interviews, they're pretty smart. If your heart isn't really in it, they'll probably be able to pick up on it. So if you are going to change courses when you get there, probably you want that to be because you actually genuinely changed your mind after you started the course. It turned out wasn't right for you. I would say that going in without quite the purest of intentions is going to make the application process a lot harder. I'm not sure I could convincingly pretend I wanted to study, I don't know, chemistry, not least because I know nothing about chemistry. And the thing to remember there as well is that it is, you can't just switch into medicine once you've got there. They won't let you do that. And it'll be very difficult to switch into something like E&M or PPE as well, as those are such competitive courses. I think if they're related subjects, then I guess sure. But again, you don't try and outthink the process. If you want to study chemistry at Oxford, apply to study chemistry at Oxford. That's the best way to get in, doing the thing. And Beta asks about Thomas, what did you do differently the second time, and why do you think you were successful?
I mean, definitely the amount of preparation I put in. The first time, I didn't really prepare that much. I was doing it on my own in my my school didn't offer any admissions help really. So kind of doing a few questions before I started preparing for the ECAA about 2 weeks before the exam actually happened. And then the interview as well, I didn't really prepare that much. And I think kind of under the diluted interpretation that it was all just gonna magically work out for me. Whereas the second time, I started preparing for the ECAA several months in advance. I mean, about half a year in advance, honestly. Putting a lot more work in, preparing a lot more for interview, reading a lot more. I mean, the process it's kind of transparent really, in the sense that you put in more work, you're probably going to have a higher chance of success. It is really just about putting in a lot of work, and not obviously you shouldn't overwork yourself. It's not like I was dragging myself to the library all the time, but yeah, I mean, the amount of work is the main difference. The second big differentiator is confidence. I think you have to really believe that you deserve a place, and that you're capable of, I mean, it's horrible to make it sound like a competition, but that you're capable of essentially beating out the other applicants to a place. I think you have to really truly believe that. But again, that comes from doing work. That confidence, you don't just fabricate it out of thin air. That comes out of doing a lot of prep.
Lovely stuff. I think we are more or less out of questions. So just finally, if Thomas and James, if you could talk a little bit about what your experience, the package you took up with us was like. And this is a nice question. Monica asks, did you know as you were walking out of the interview room that you'd nailed it? Did it feel like you had succeeded? I would just add my personal experience here was I was sure I'd got into Oxford, but I hadn't. But maybe you weren't as arrogant as I was, Thomas.
Well, I think my interview was a bit of a strange one. I don't think this happens very often, but at the end of my interview, both my interviewers told me that I had given an outstanding interview, and they congratulated me, and then they told me to go relax. So I was kind of, I don't know, I couldn't tell if they were messing with me, because I didn't feel like my test had gone that well. But yeah, so after that, I told my parents. They were ready to pop the champagne already, but I was like, you never know, they're sneaky academics. So I just waited until the 25th of January to find out. But I will say I don't think you can really tell whether it's gone that well or not. I mean, it felt like it went really well, but you don't know how many people did really well.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge with this process, and I think is the thing about reapplying that's the most difficult, which is it isn't about how good you are, it's about how bad the other applicants are. It might be that you're unlucky, you're in a year where you're up against a bunch of future Nobel Prize winners, and that's just bad luck. So you can only do your best, but unfortunately if other people's best is better, then you're in trouble, unfortunately. But unless you have anything else, oh yes, to talk a little bit about the program, you two, and then we'll let everyone escape and get back to their day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think maybe we should go back to where it all began. So, I mean, I can't remember if it was yourself, Thomas, or Mum who kind of contacted us initially, but what was the thought process behind that? Why did you reach out to us?
Well, when we reached out was when I and my family were considering reapplying, and our thought process was that if I'm going to take essentially a gap year and do this all over again, I'm not going to take any chances anymore. Like, I'm going to put everything into this, and I'm going to make sure I maximize my chances of getting in. And I mean, I think we thought quite rightly that going through UniAdmissions was the best decision in terms of making sure we kind of secured, well, not secured, but we maximized the chances. And yeah, that's why we reached out. Also, knowing I would be kind of preparing alone, I knew I wasn't going to be able to work in as much of a structured way, or as much as in a tutoring program. So we really thought that was, we were putting everything into it, essentially.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, you know, we had a couple of chats, didn't we? And, you know, with sort of mum present as well. And then you sort of joined the program, and pretty much, you know, the ball started rolling from there, really, didn't you? And you started sort of doing your preparation things. So yeah, I mean, that's the idea, really. If it's something that you're potentially interested in, if you do have any other questions that we haven't kind of answered today, just get in contact with us. It's just a conversation with myself or, you know, one of my colleagues. You know, have a chat about, you know, what your plans are, and, you know, whether we can help. And that's really the idea. And if we think we can help, you know, we'll tell you, and we'll try and give you some helpful advice about, you know, how best to prepare. But yeah, that's really how the process went. I hope that was what you wanted to hear, Matt. Was there anything else? Any more details?
No, that works for me. I think all I have to say is just say thank you to everyone for coming along. It would be very boring to do these if no one came and listened. Obviously, out of a sense of duty, I would still do it, but it would make the Q&A round very difficult. So thank you all for coming. We are taking a break next week because I'm going to see La Boheme at the Opera House. So I can't do it. I'm busy. And the following week, we'll be back talking about applying for medicine, something that I don't know an enormous amount about because I've never been a doctor, but I will be ably assisted by Rohan for that one. And he is literally a doctor, so I'm sure he'll be able to help. So with that, say goodbye, Thomas.
Bye, guys.
Say goodbye, James.
See you soon.
And it's goodbye from me as well. Have a lovely weekend, everyone, and we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks' time, or not. Whatever you prefer, but days are always happening. Goodbye now.